Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today it's time for the complete BREAKpoint Set review. Lots to get talking about. The Togekiss and the Luxray are two cards that I thought I'd put on the opening slide because I'm not going to discuss them because they're terrible. So we are going to be cherry picking the best cards of the set, and hopefully it's going to keep it entertaining for you guys. So let's jump into it. You'll notice that there's still some of the Japanese scans. We know the full set list because it was released in French. But we don't have the scans, unfortunately, for every English card. So there's a handful that will be, just like the Togekiss and the Luxray that you can see. But there'll be a handful that I've had to improvise on, so I hope you can bear with me, and it does remain entertaining. So let's start off with Durant. This is the new Durant that we have. It has the same sort of theme as the old Durant. The old Durant did Devour that could discard the top card for each Durant you had in play. So it had a maximum milling potential of 4. And this Durant seems to follow a same theme. It's a 70 HP grass type, and its second attack is the main one that we look for, with a grass and colourless cost. Grind down. If this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, you get to discard the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. So this is the most powerful milling card we will have in the standard format when this card comes out. And it's quite easy to get damage counters on this guy. You can use Team Magma's Secret Base, you could use Rainbow Energy, just receiving counters in general. You could even play a card that puts 10 damage on each of your own bench Pokemon if you really want to go down that route. So plenty of ways to get damage on these Durants. I don't foresee this card being too good, even though it is the most powerful mill card that we have in standard right now. Mill is just completely not a thing, and the 2 energy cost is the main downside of this card. Like, you have to put damage counters on yourself in the first place, so Durant is going to have less than 70 HP to get knocked out each turn. That's really, really easy to kill. And once you get over those Durants, you know, it's an easy 6 prizes for your opponent, basically. Now, we can use things like EXP Share to maybe chain the Durants a little bit easier, but it's still an annoying 2 energy cost. At that point, you're playing 4 Rainbow and then probably like 6 of other energy because you actually need to hit them. If you play less energy, then the EXP Shares are pretty useless, and you don't want to be playing stuff like Energy Acceleration in a Durant deck. It just feels ridiculous. So although it does have a lot of powerful milling potential, in sort of comparison to the past, like, we do have Trick Shovel and Ninjask, which are ways that we could get additional discards in comparison to the old Durant, but I still don't think this is going to be a fast enough way of milling people, just because it's still kind of awkward. There'll be times when you don't get the damage counters on Durant, there'll be times when you miss EXP Share drops and stuff like that, and you're just going to be slightly inconsistent. You're not always going to be using that second attack, which is the main usage of this card. It does actually have, for a single grass energy, 10 damage and discard the top card of your opponent's deck, so it's still synergistic, but it's way less good to just get rid of 1 card than it is to get rid of 4 for a mill strategy. That's a no-brainer right there. But yeah, I think it's nice that we're starting to see more mill cards, because there hasn't been a real good mill deck for a while in standard. And this has potential, but I don't think it's quite there. So that's the only grass type I want to talk about. Let's chat about Emboar EX, and we do actually have this one in English, which is nice. It's a 180 HP Fire type EX. You can see straight away I've compared it to Charizard because I think it's very comparable. Its first attack for a Fire and Colourless does 20 plus 20 more for each heads that you flip, and you continually flip until you get tails. So a base of 20 is really poor, even if you can blacksmith that on for the first turn. Like, 40 damage, yeah, it's okay, it kills Combi, but I mean, the Spiral Punch can kill it anyway thanks to weakness, so you're not really accessing anything with 1 heads flip. You start accessing lower HP basics with 2 heads flips, but, you know, you don't want to rely on that to have any good value. It's actually the second attack that feels more interesting to me. For 2 Fire and 2 Colourless, so Blacksmith plus DC actually gets there in 1 turn. We get to do 150, and we discard 2 energy attached to this Pokemon. This is the real reason why I compare it to Charizard. So Charizard at the moment is seeing play as a 1 or 2 of in Entei Zard decks. Charizard, first of all, its first attack is way better than Emboar's. Wing attack allows it to be good against stuff like Night March, because you put an Assault Vest on Charizard, you use Wing attack every turn, you kill every Night Marcher, and it's hard for them to knock you out. Emboar doesn't have that option in that deck, so already Charizard's winning out. But then you compare Combustion Blast with Strong Flare. Charizard can't stream Combustion Blast. You need to retreat out, or you need to use Wing Attack the next turn. or you need to somehow use like escape rope, retreat shenanigans or something to get back into Charizard. Whereas Emboar discards 2 energy. I feel like Emboar's second attack is an improvement, a very slight improvement on Combustion Blast, because you really don't mind in an Entei deck getting rid of the fire energy. Sometimes it can actually help you out more, which is pretty cool. So I think I prefer the attack Strong Flare over Combustion Blast, but the fact that Charizard has Wing Attack makes me think it's going to be played over Emboar. And also there's the biggest thing for me is actually the retreat cost. Emboar has an extra retreat, and Charizard just has the 2 retreat costs. So once Emboar uses Strong Flare, you have to either attach an extra energy to retreat, or you need to hit Blacksmith again to use another Strong Flare. Or you need to hit like Floatstone or something, but Entei Charizard doesn't play those. Whereas Charizard, you use Combustion Blast, you can just pay the retreat of the 2 fire, or you can just pay DCE and retreat out into Entei. So I feel like Charizard's just slightly better flexibility, edges it against Emboar, so I don't feel like Emboar will see much play, because Charizard is slightly superior to it. Next up we have a fire type. I feel like this is only worth a mention. 100 HP basic fire type. You can do Fortified Flame for a single fire energy, which is 20, and if this Pokemon has a tool on it, you do 20 more damage. It doesn't sound fantastic at all, but it's actually the second attack that I like. For 1 fire, 2 colorless, you do just a vanilla 70. For a basic, that's not awful for DCE plus colorless. It might find its way into a Smeargle box deck. It's really cross your fingers, and this is probably one of the best basic type fire things that we could use in a Smeargle box deck. You've seen stuff like Regirock do well. The Cresselia has seen play sometimes. And if Smeargle box is going to become a thing, and I personally think it will do, because we have some great support for cards like Smeargle in this set, this might be the fire type attacker. The only issue is that at the moment, the grass types that people would play, it's going to be Vespiquen, which we can just kill with other things anyway, or it's going to be Sceptile, which we don't actually one-hit, even with Muscle Bands. So I feel like Heatmor is going to be one of these niche attackers. Keep it in your binder, but have it in the back of your mind for if you are playing Smeargle box and you're struggling with grass stuff that comes out in the future. So onto the first break evolution. We do have the English scans of the break, which is fantastic. Golduck is a 140 HP break evolution, so it's essentially a stage 2, which is basically means it's got pretty fair HP for what it is. The ability is Hyper Transfer. As often as you like during a turn, you may move a basic energy from one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. So this is the same as Fairy Transfer, it's just that you're not limited to Fairy energy. It has to be basic energy though, so you could even argue that Fairy Transfer is better, because you can move stuff like Double Dragon energy around Dragon types and stuff like that. You don't have that option for Golduck, but it is way more versatile. We can spread any energy around. We've seen Aromatisse be an archetype in and around the top tables for a while. It's dipped out of popularity when Max Potion went, but Max Potion's back, as you can see here. So the Aromatisse style deck could be becoming good again, and therefore Golduck could be becoming good again. Personally, I feel like Aromatisse is good enough because it's a stage 1 and it's levelable, searchable, so it's a lot easier to get into Aromatisse than it is to get into Golduck. We do have Archies, but you'd have to actually Archies into the Golduck, because you can't go into breaks with Archie. So it's just as slow, even if you get turn 1 Archies, getting into the break as it is going into Aromatisse. So I personally don't think it's going to work, because Fairy decks are so weak when you target the Aromatisse and kill it. But there's the flip side that you can have 2 Spritzy on the bench, and whenever one Aromatisse is going to get picked off, you can just evolve into another one. It's going to be really hard for you to chain Golduck breaks, because it's an extra stage that you have to get. So if you go into one Golduck break, you have to, and even if you just have another Psyduck on the bench, you're guaranteed to lose like a couple of turns of Hyper Transfer. So I think that's really weak. Also, a new challenge for Aromatisse decks that like we're yet to really see if it's going to affect it too much, is that Hex Maniac's a thing, right? So the strategy behind Fairy Transfer, Max Potion, transfer it back on, attack again, people can just deny that with a Hex on the turn that they attack. So I think both of these archetypes are going to get worse, and I feel like Golduck is the inferior between Golduck and Aromatisse, so I really don't see it seeing too much play. Just a few quick notes on the Stage 1 version of Golduck. Overturn 20 and discard a special. That's actually a decent utility attack. It's good for stalling as you're looking to find the break evolution and you happen to lead with Psyduck or something, so not awful. Something to note, but yeah, I really don't see this working over Aromatisse. Next up, another very interesting water type with a very interesting ability. King's Inspiration is the Slowking's ability here. And once during a turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, choose an energy attached to your opponent's active and move it to one of his or her bench Pokemon. So this is comparable, I think, to Crawdaunt. Crawdaunt would be another bench sitter that you use to try and disrupt people. Unruly Claw is when you evolve into Crawdaunt, you get an automatic discard from the active. So it's more immediate than Slowking, but Slowking stays on the board like every turn and gives you that 50-50 flip. And of course this stacks. So if you have 2 Slowking on your bench, you have a 75% chance that you're going to move an energy from your opponent's active to one of their bench. Why is moving energy sometimes better than discarding itself? Because we can move it to other bench targets like Shaman and then Lysander and kill it, because it's going to be a lot easier to kill Shaman than it is going to be able to kill. Most of the time your opponent's active is going to be a much higher HP EX Pokemon, right? So you want to move the energy off that thing so it's less of a threat in terms of its damage, and then you shift it over to Shaman, you take some cheap prizes, but you also affect the board state, so it's a real bonus for taking tempo swings in terms of prizes, because you're also getting rid of energy at the same time. Additionally, there are decks like Giratina and other Dragon-type decks. There's a lot of these sorts of energy that can only be attached to the right type of Pokemon. So there's going to be situations where something has double Dragon on it, like Giratina, and you use King's Inspiration, move it to Shaman, and then it discards itself. So it effectively works as a discard card anyway, a lot of the time. And also against fire decks, we know that Charizard Entei has been popping up lately. That is very focused, in fact, on putting the fire in the discard pile. So there's times when moving it to things like Shaman is going to be way more helpful to you than something like Crawdaunt that would just discard it. So I think this is a fantastic ability. I don't necessarily see where this is going to fit in, other than some sort of hammer disruption deck, probably with Toad or some other form of disruption, but I do see this being a very, very decent ability. Its attack is garbage, so don't worry about that. A quick note on the Slowpoke. It has the DCE cost attack, Awesome Tail, that searches your deck for a Pokemon and then puts it into the hand. Really awful, but because Slowpoke has a 2 retreat cost anyway, if you are unfortunate enough to lead Slowpoke, it's good to be aware of that attack, because I guess it can find you Slowking next turn or find you something else. So it's just a little thing I'd like to pick up on. When is King's Inspiration worse than something like Crawdaunt? Well, it's just like we were mentioning, Aromatisse and Golduck, they really don't care if you move an energy around, because they can just move it straight back. So there are times when it's better, times when it's worse than just regular old discard. I think if you're fitting space for a 2-2 Slowking, you really have to evaluate if it's better or worse than just hammers themselves. I guess if you're expecting a lot of Trainer Lock, Slowking is better. So it's just going to be one of these things that can fade in and out of popularity, I think, for disruption decks. Next up we have the first EX and Mega pairing. This is going to be Gyarados EX. So the regular has 180 HP, which is on the slightly bulkier side for EXs, which is nice. His first attack is Stormy Seas, and you flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, you search your deck for a water energy and attach it to this dude. So it's a really weak version of the Stoke Charizard. I remember Stoke allowed you to flip more coins to get more energy, so it's a lot worse for you to do it this way. But still, it can be an extra attachment here or there if you're going first, and it can help you get to your overall destination, because both its second attack and the Mega's attack both require 4 energy, so really, really hefty. Splash Burn for 2 water, 2 colourless does 130 and 10 to each of your own bench. I really think this is underwhelming for the amount of energy you have to commit to a Gyarados. We don't have very good water acceleration right now. I'll get onto Palkia EX in a moment. That's another new EX, but I feel like if you're going to play Gyarados, it's because of the Mega. Quick note, it has a massive 4 retreat cost, so again, we're going to need a card that can mitigate that I'll show off later on. Also, it has a weakness to lightning, and this is really going to hurt the card. You get instantly killed by Manectrics, even the Mega gets instantly killed by regular Manectric if you have a tool on it. And because we are a Mega, a lot of the time we're going to have Spirit Link attached. So that is, of course, unless we use Archie to get into the Gyarados. Let's not forget that that's an option. It's just not a very consistent way of getting multiple Gyarados out. So there is that option, but most of the time it's going to be the traditional Spirit Link into Mega turn 2. So let's look at this attack. Blast Geyser does 120, and it does 20 more for each water attached to this Pokemon. And if you do, discard the top 2 cards of your own deck. So it does have the potential to be a powerhouse card. If you have 4 energy attached and you choose to do the extra damage, you are doing 200 with the if all of those colorless energies are waters. So we do have options, a lot more options to speed up a Mega Evolution, because we have Mega Turbo, of course, to get instant attachments from the discard pile. It almost does seem synergistic with its discard, because sometimes you can hit Water Energy, which can then get Mega Turboed back. There's also the Palkia EX, that is basically like a new version of Virizion. I'll get onto it in a moment, but it could be used to power up Gyarados. I feel like there's better options than Gyarados to power up, so I don't actually see Gyarados doing well, because although it has this nice 240 HP, it's got the weakness to Manectric. Manectric's going to remain popular. I don't see anything new in the set that's going to challenge Manectric so much that it can't be played anymore, so you have to expect Gyarados to have a really bad Manectric matchup, and that's really not good for you. So on that basis alone, I don't feel like it's going to be good enough. Additionally, it feels really slow. Having to power up 4 energy Megas, like, you can only really get away with that with stuff like Primal Groudon. Not many other things are going to give you the time to develop that much energy. It's just the speed of the metagame is going to get punished by a lot of things. So overall, Gyarados is one for the collectors rather than one for the players, in my opinion. So here is Palkia EX. This is the one I was mentioning a couple of seconds ago. 180 HP. Again, it's the slightly higher side, which is very nice. It does have a weakness to Grass. I think I prefer it to a weakness to Lightning, but it's still awkward in its own right, because you're really weak to Vespiquen, and you're quite weak to Sceptile as well. I feel like Sceptile might even be creeping back into the metagame for a few reasons I'll mention later on. So it's actually not very great that we have a weakness to Grass. Aqua Turbo is his first attack for 2 water energy. It does 40 damage, and you get to search the deck for 2 water and attach them to one of your benched Pokemon. So this is very similar to the Virizion EX that we've seen really dominate for a while back in the day with Genesect. So we really need to have an attacker that we can use that's really going to benefit from this. I mentioned Gyarados as one thing that we could use. There's also, even if we get Blastoise Spirit Links, the Blastoise might even be a consideration, because Hydro Bombard isn't actually the worst attack I've ever seen. I feel like the most popular choice that you're going to pair with Palkia is actually going to be Kyogre, because it has the chunky HP, it has a really good attack in Tidal Storm that actually combos math-wise with Aqua Turbo, because you end up getting... So you're 2-shotting the first thing, because Aqua Turbo does 40, then Tidal Storm does 150, so you're killing most EXs in 2 hits. And then from there, you've done the bench snipes on all their other EXs, so then Tidal Storm will continue to get 1 hits. And it's also really nice synergy, because once you've used Tidal Storm, you can move those energies back onto Palkia, because he actually has a second attack for a really hefty 4 energy. I think the only way you would be attacking with Palkia with its second attack is if you're playing it in a Kyogre build. But Pearl Hurricane, 120 with a 30 to one of your opponent's bench. It's like a hybrid attack between... it's like a buffed up version of Darkrai's Night Spear, right? 120 with the 30 snipe. We know that Night Spear is really good, so I feel Pearl Hurricane does have its place to be used now and again if you are the Primal Kyogre player with Palkia. My only criticisms of the deck would be that it's still really slow. Like, Virgen isn't working in Expanded right now just because of the speed of the deck. I think you could argue that it wasn't doing well at the end of its career anyway, because Night March was just destroying that deck, because you rarely have the time to attach 2 energy to a Pokemon these days. It sounds really ridiculous, but Night March can just eat that up really quick. So if you're going second, right, they can attack you before you've ever used 1 Aqua Turbo. Even if you are going first, they can miss the KO, but then you only have 1 Aqua Turbo, and then you're relying on like Primal Koga for the whole game. which isn't great, but actually I guess it can tank, but overall I feel like the speed of the deck is going to be its biggest downfall. That and its weakness to grass, obviously, but it might even mean that you need to play stuff like Max Elixir just so that you can get Palkia working on the first turn. But that seems kind of clunky, so I don't know. I think we're going to have to play around with Palkia. There's huge potential here. I just don't know if it's quick enough. I really hope that it is, because I can see Palkia working really nicely with Primal Kyogre. Seems like a really nice combo. Next up, another card that could feature in these water-type decks is going to be Manaphy EX. I mentioned that Gyarados has a huge 4 retreat costs, and Manaphy has the ability Aqua Tube, and anything with water energy now has no retreat cost, so it's like Dark Cloak, but for water energy. Other big differences is that Manaphy has 120 HP. That's really, really terrible. So essentially, you have to be very adamant that you want to play Manaphy, because it's essentially having another Shaman on your bench the whole game that can give up 2 prizes. And I feel like not many people are actually going to play this Manaphy, just because we have Floatstone, we have Switch, we have AZ. I don't think it's worth putting this prize target on your bench. Like the effect of Shaman is so strong that you need to play down 1 Shaman, but even a lot of the time people try and AZ up Shaman to protect the prizes and stuff like that, even using Sky Return. Manaphy doesn't have those sorts of things available to it, and really it only provides free retreat. Like, it's not actually that fantastic for you for waters, so I think it's just too big of a prize target to be used. I could see it working maybe in a handful of decks. Like, I guess if you're playing Fairy Dragons, you can move around Dragon Energy to like free retreat stuff. You can move around other things as well. Just moving between your water attackers, like, it seems decent. Like, it could work with the chunky retreaters of Kyogre and Palkia. It might find its way as a one-off in there, but at the same time, I feel like stuff like Floatstone and just switching in general, or even just using Keldeo Floatstone, not Keldeo Floatstone, Zoroark Floatstone, is going to be way better. Obviously, in Expanded, like, you're just going to use Darkrai instead, unless you are a water-based deck, but the main water-based deck has Keldeo anyway, so retreating's not an issue for you. So I don't feel like Manaphy is going to see too much play either. Next up, quick note on Tympole. This is just a fun one rather than a great new addition. The new Tympole actually has the round attack. So with Eyes on Expanded, we have more round attackers. The old Tympole didn't have round, so it was a lot harder for your Seismitoad to get one-hits. Now it's really easy for Seismitoad to get one-hit knockouts. And you can actually skimp out on the Palpitoad line now. Like, you used to have to play like 3 or 4 of this guy. Now you can play the Candy Engine much more effectively. I still don't think the deck's good by any stretch of the imagination, but it just gives you more options with round, so it seems pretty fun. Next up is Greninja, and I feel like this is going to be a long section because there's so much to talk about Greninja. This is, I think, my favourite Pokemon of the whole set, like the combination of these cards. Every single piece of this Greninja line is fantastic. I didn't have space to put the Froakie in, but even that has, for a single water, you can flip for paralysis. And that's just an extra really nice thing. Like, we've seen it on Nuzzle Pikachu, and that just helps out the Raichu deck in random situations. It could help this deck in random situations at the same time, so that's a little thumbs up for Froakie. The Frogadier also gets mad props because Water Clone is its attack for 1 water energy. You get to search your deck for up to 3 Frogadier and put them onto your bench, so hopefully you didn't prize any Frogadier, and you get to use on turn 2 or on turn 1 if you use a Wally. Actually, if you can even Archies into the Frogadier. So there's options to use this attack on the first turn with either Wally or Archie, or you can just go down the regular route of evolving into Froakie, and then on turn 2, and then using this attack to fill your board of Frogadier, sorry. And this is absolutely insane. I think this is an attack that really is going to change the way we see this deck. Because now Greninja doesn't have to play like a regular Stage 2 deck. It pretty much plays as a Stage 1 deck, but has really powerful Stage 1s, if that makes sense. So once we get into these Frogadiers, like, normally we've wasted a turn or 2 doing this, so we're going to lose a couple of prizes, but we can pull back those prizes because we do have the XY Greninja, which has Water Shuriken, allowing us to discard a Water Energy and do 30 to one of our opponent's Pokemon. And then we have the Break evolution, which has the ability Giant Water Shuriken, which, as you can imagine, is very similar, but more powerful. We get to discard a water from hand, and we get to put 6 damage counters on one of our opponent's Pokemon. 6 damage counters, guys, for an ability. That's incredible. Like, you've seen how good the bats have been, right? Since they've come out, they've basically formed like 3 decks, okay? They've made like Lucario bats, they've made Toad bats, they've made Manectric bats, just because those extra damage counters are so useful, okay? But imagine doing Water Shuriken, okay? That's just 1 Water Shuriken. You can do this every turn, and it's the equivalent of 2 Crobat drops. That is insane. This is one of my favourite cards, because that damage is ridiculous. If you have the XY Greninja in play and the Greninja Break, you can do 90 damage before you've even attacked. So you're 2-hitting things without even attacking. You're 2-hitting Shaymins just with the Break, okay? Oh my goodness, this is just insane. If you have 2 Break in the same turn, right? You free retreat out of this one, because this new one has free retreat. You do 60, retreat into your other Break and do 60. You've killed a Shaymin before you've even attacked. How is this allowed, okay? It feels like I'm going overboard on this card, but in testing right now, this has been insane. It's not without its weaknesses, of course, but I'll get onto that in a moment. So let's just backtrack a little bit. So we've used Frogadier to get lots of Frogadier into play. I feel like you will play the Frogadier engine over the Rare Candy engine, because the Frogadier engine is so much nicer. Let's look at the new Greninja. I've mentioned how the XY Greninja is probably going to be used, but I think this Greninja also deserves a lot of love. It has free retreat for one thing, which is fantastic. Its first attack for a single colourless energy is Shadow Slip. It does 40, and until the end of your opponent's next turn, each Pokemon he or she has in play, in their hand, and in the discard pile have no abilities, including ones which come into play that turn. So it's not like they can just drop a Shaymin and then that ability works. It's essentially a Hex Maniac for a turn. This is incredible. A really incredible attack. A colourless energy for 40 damage, and you lock abilities. This could even end up being like a new Garbodor in terms of splash ability. It doesn't even have to feature in a Greninja deck. It could just be an Archie target that can have free retreat, colourless attack cost, and you use essentially a Hex Maniac for a turn. We've seen decks splash in Seismitoad because they can just do Quaking Punch because they're already playing DCE. Well, this, if you're already playing like an Archie build, now you can have ability lock for a turn and just do a little bit of chip damage here and there. I think this is an amazing attacker. I think it's good enough to play, obviously good enough to play in the Greninja deck itself, but I don't think it might find play in decks outside of Greninja. I think it's very, very, very strong, especially with the free retreat. Like, it becomes a great Archie's ace in the whole target. Its second attack, for those of you who are actually playing Water Energy, for a single water you do 60, and you may choose a water attached to this Pokemon and return it to the hand. If you do, you do 20 more damage. So 80 damage for 1 energy, that's also really, really good. You also return the energy to the hand, so if you are knocked out, you still have the energy to use for Shurikens and Giant Shurikens later down the line. So I just love this Greninja deck. I feel the power of this Greninja deck alone is going to bring back Garbodor in Standard in a big way. That is going to be one of the best ways to counter Greninja, because other than that, I don't see many decks winning. Honestly, the build me and Jack have got, oh guys, you're going to love it. Jack's going to profile it in a few days' time, I think, but this is such a strong deck. Even though we've only played like for a couple of weeks and we've got probably a rough list that could still be worked on and ironed out, even at the moment, it's destroying like every other deck that I'm building right now. So that's like standard stuff as well, like pre-breakpoint. So it is really getting a lot of wins right now for me and him. So it's a very, very strong deck. Definitely don't underestimate this. Just 1 Water Shuriken is 2 Crobats. Just think about that for a moment. And you can do it every turn. Oh my goodness. That alone just makes me love this deck. Yes, it is slow, but it has the comeback potential with these abilities. So I really do rate this a lot. We do have the Archie's Ace, so there's also the opportunity for you to just play like 2 Greninjas and 1 Break in the good old-fashioned Milk Tank Greninja deck, the Kung Fu Cow deck, which I heard it be called the other day, and I'm using that name because it's fantastic. So Kung Fu Cow gets a slight increase if you want to play 1 Break in general, and even just the regular Greninja deck can take advantage of Milk Tank because it has very similar damage to Gecko Slash, so you may as well just send up Milk Tank. You much prefer that dying so that you have your ability Pokemon protected on the bench. The Greninja Break does have to be active, so there is that. but most of the time you are going to be active. Even like between turns, if your Miltank is killed, if you're using a heavy Miltank build, you can go into the free retreat one, break evolve, 60 damage, free retreat. It's just fantastic. This deck is going to be huge, honestly. There's so many good things that I can see here. Like I say, Garbodor is going to be huge for it. And also the biggest thing that beats it is Mega Sceptile. Mega Sceptile stomps this deck because it has Theta Stop. So none of the water shurikens are going to do anything to you in terms of damage. Like, they can kill off Shamans, but they're going to run out of prizes eventually, basically. So, and of course, Sceptile hits for weakness because this deck is grass weak. So I can see it doing really well against this deck. But yeah, that's Greninja. I'm a massive fan. Get testing, guys, and stick around because Jack's going to be profiling the list that we've made, and it's a really good one. I think this is definitely the thing. If you're going to pick up any Pokemon from this set, it's got to be Greninjas. Next up for lightning types, I think there's only one lightning type I want to go into. That's going to be Zebstrika. It's a combination of an interesting attack and an interesting ability. So Zebra Zone, as long as this Pokemon is in play, damage from your lightning type Pokemon's attacks are not affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So it essentially gives our lightning type attackers shred. Okay, so that allows us to hit through Aegislash even if we have specials on us. Allows us to hit through Beautifly even if we are EX Pokemon. So I think this is decent. You know, I don't think there's many lightning types out there at the moment that could really benefit from this. Manectric doesn't play specials, so you get around Aegislash. Like, there's other ways, like you can just play stuff like Raikou if you're really worried about things like Beautifly or Regice. So I don't feel like you're going to make the space for Zebstrika in lightning decks. But let's move on to his attack now, which also makes me hopeful for this card. And also, like, the ability may not be helpful now, but later down the line we could find a new lightning type attacker that really benefits from Zebra Zone. So it's definitely a strong ability that could work later down the line. Zebra Zone is a DCE cost, which is nice because it becomes then at least a bit more splashable. We have Takedown Bolt. This does 50, and if your opponent's active Pokemon has a fighting resistance, you do 60 more damage. So the idea is you play this in a fighting based deck, and you pretty much flip your bad matchup into winnable, because things that have fighting resistance are often weak to lightning. That's the case for almost every fighting resist Pokemon, because most of the bird type Pokemon basically have fighting resistance, so they then have the weakness to lightning. So the idea is you just attach DCE, you're doing 110 with the bonus damage, and then that gets times by 2. So the idea is you then, for these fighting type decks, you have a counter for these things that you would otherwise really struggle to kill. So it's questionable whether these fighting decks are going to be playing double colorless in the first place. If they are playing DCE, then I think it's worth playing Zebstrika. Maybe as just a 1-1 if you are struggling against stuff like Crobat, which the decks can do in fairness. And like Yveltal, it can trade favourably there. But overall, I think it's a little bit too niche and a bit too many deck slots to be considered. I think there's other ways of getting around resistance for less commitment than a staged 1 Pokemon. So there we are. So onto the psychic types, I think. And yeah, we have Hypno. This is a pretty interesting one. A really creepy card. First off, let's just appreciate the artwork and the creepiness of the text of this ability as well. Good night, babies. Yeah. I think, I don't know. It's not really my type of humour, but I guess. Once during a turn, you may leave both active Pokemon asleep. It's actually a really good ability. Because there's synergy all over the place with this card. The new Darkrai EX is the one that screams out. We'll get onto the Darkrai in a moment, but it really makes that deck viable on its own, really. We also have the new stadium called All Night Party, which allows us to get ourselves out of sleep. So, like, putting both of us to sleep isn't an issue because we have All Night Party, and we have Zoroark that can float stone, stand in retreat anyway. So, Hypno is always going to be good for you if you build your deck around him. He could also be used in like a Toad deck, again with Zoro and Float. I remember that Aromatisse Toad was really good for like mirror matching Toads because you played the Malamar, kept sending them to sleep, and then you break the Quaking Punch lock. Well, using a Hypno Zoroark engine could do a similar situation where you're getting Quaking Punches if they stay asleep, then they're not attacking you. That's not exclusively good for Toad Mirrors. It's going to be good for a bunch of things to help you win the prize trade, because as we know right now, Toad's damage in Standard isn't quite good enough, so buying a turn here or there where they're staying asleep is going to really help you out. So I think there's obvious synergy with Darkrai, and maybe slightly less obvious, but still pretty good synergy with Toad variants. So I think Hypno is going to be really good. Next up we have Espeon EX, a pretty interesting niche card that I think it could sneak its way into a deck here or there if evolutions become popular. Let me explain. The attack Miraculous Shine for a colorless energy devolves each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and put the highest stage card into their hand. So if you're using stuff like a Greninja deck, you might want to play one Espeon just for mirror matches, because you can let those shurikens do the work and then you devolve them. Also, if you're just devolving Greninjas, it means that they can't break the following turn, so it might find its way as a one-of in Greninja decks for mirror matches. Similarly, it could work in Bat decks, because you're going to be using Sneaky and Surprise Bites, and obviously those are so good on lower HP Pokemon. I think the fact that Greninja is going to be good on its own makes me think that other evolution decks aren't going to be too strong, so I don't feel like Espeon's going to see play, just because they'll phase out of... evolutions aren't big at the moment anyway, but they're going to continue to not be big because Greninja Break can punish them really hard. So you don't need to play the Espeon, because people already won't be playing evolution decks because of the power of Greninja on its own. That being said, it could also work with Trev Break, which is one I'll get into momentarily. And again, it's one of these things that works with Dusknoir, where you devolve and then take a bunch of prizes all at one turn. It's kind of like a wombo combo card that could work in Expanded. Overall, I don't think it'll see too much play. If it does ever see play, it'll be a one-of in random decks that like to do sniping, like the ones I've just talked about. Oh, next up is Garbodor. He's back, baby. Literally the same ability, Garbotoxin. If it has a tool attached, each Pokemon in play, their hand, and in the discard pile have no abilities except for Garbodor. Yeah, pretty nice. This is going to be one of the things that can stop Greninja from doing well. But as you can see in the top right corner, I've put already that we have so much ability lock in format. Is Garbodor going to be as powerful as he once was? We have Wobbuffet that people are playing. We have Greninja's attack that can now ability lock as well. And of course we have Hexmaniac, the most splashable of them all. Any deck now can have turns of essentially Garbodor lock. So I'm not really certain that Garbodor is going to be as popular the second time round as he was in the first place. That being said, there's a few powerful abilities in this set that make me feel like Garbodor could be good. Like shutting off Hypno in the Darkrai deck is really big. Shutting off Zoroark in Yveltal decks. You also shut off Gallade at the same time. Shutting off Greninja, of course, is going to be huge. So there's a lot of decent abilities in format right now that Garbodor can put a check to. So that alone makes me feel like it could be good. But there are plenty of different avenues. You now have the option of going down for ability lock. So the attack is different from the old attack, but it's still pretty bad. Psychic 3 colorless, 60. Your opponent's active is now poisoned and confused. Kind of frustrating, but you're never going to put that much energy on Garbodor. It's going to be your bench sitter. It's going to have a float stone. That's just how it will be. Potentially a resurgence in Seismitoad, because Toad Garb, they're like the best of friends. We see them high-fiving all the time on Verbank, so they must be good buddies. But yeah, I'm not convinced that Toad Garb will come back just because we don't have lasers. But I think it's going to be a nice check to other decks that are really heavily ability focused. So I think it'll see play in decks here and there. It could even find space in stuff like Vespiquen. I remember early stages of the Flareon deck sometimes play the 2-2 Garbodor because you can then just shut down ability lock or ability focused decks, and you just have you have the option to dump them if you're not up against ability focused decks. So it could even squeeze into a Vespiquen build. You do have to make space for a couple of float stones, so that might be a problem, but overall it could help out Vespiquen's matchups. So interesting avenues for Garbodor. I don't think it's going to be as popular as it first was, just because of the amount of options that we have, but still very, very powerful ability, and it's going to keep the format in check overall. Next up is Trevenant and the Break. It's another one of these evolution lines where I want to talk about every single part of it. The Phantomp is really helpful, 50 HP, but it has the colorless attack Ascension. that allows you to search your deck for Trevenant basically and put it onto it. So you guarantee turn 1 Trainer Lock as long as you have either Dimension Valley or an Energy. If you're going second, which is really nice. If you're going first, you still probably will be playing the Wally because turn 1 Trainer Lock is huge. If you're playing the new Trevenant, you also have a different type of lock. This Trevenant's ability is called Seed of Anxiety. If this Pokemon is active, your opponent's basic Pokemon's attacks is an extra colorless energy. So looking at the format right now, the majority of decks are basic, right? There's only a few evolution decks out there that are reliant on attacking with the evolutions. So this extra colorless cost, like think of it as a head ringer, but for every basic. That's a really, really strong ability, I think. Not sure if it outweighs Forest Curse. It might be 2 separate decks, basically. But I think it's really nice for helping you stall. Like Night March decks that have to use an extra energy, that's going to really suck for them. And stuff like that could really buy you enough time to win just by using hammers on top of this Seed of Anxiety. It's going to make it very difficult for decks to get attacking. It could go back to the phase where it just sits as an active Pokemon for stuff like Gengar. It could sit as an active Pokemon for stuff like Donphan and Expanded. So there's definitely avenues for this Trevenant. It's very interesting. Its attack is also fairly decent. For a Psychic DCE or Psychic Dimension Valley, I guess, or just Psychic Other Energy and D-Valley, you do 70 and 10 more damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active. So it synergizes well with its ability because you're trying to force your opponent to have as many energy attached as possible to actually get attacking. So its numbers are pretty good. You can put Muscle Man on to do a base of 90 anyway, so you're two-shotting things even without energy on them. So it works nicely, I think. I think it'll probably crop up as a hammer-based deck first off. It might not even play the break to start with. But I think that's ability is actually really, really good. It does obviously have downsides and bad matchups like Raichu and Vespiquen and Greninja, of course, but I think it's still pretty strong against a lot of the format right now. It does have weakness to Dark, so it's still pretty weak against Yveltal, even with this ability. But overall, I think it's got fairly decent matchups other than that. The Break has 160 HP, which is really nice, seeing as though it's basically a Stage 2 Pokemon that you can't rare candy. But it has a decent attack as well. Silent Fear for a Psychic and Colorless, or just 1 Psychic plus the Valley. Does 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon. I think this is not fast enough for Standard right now, personally. Just because, unless you're playing up against Night March, like, it's not going to rack up quickly enough to where you're actually taking prizes. Normally your Trevenant Breaks are going to be dying quickly, and it's not really going to have much effect. Especially, like I was saying with Greninja, because there's Greninja around, there'll be less low HP Pokemon sat on the bench. So it's going to be less optimal for Trevenant Break to do well. Whereas in Expanded, you can use Dusknoir, and using Dusknoir with Silent Fear can rack up a ridiculous amount of damage counters. Most EX decks are using like Hooper. Against stuff like Archie and Maxi decks, you can move all of the damage onto their target and then just kill them really easily. A lot of decks just fill the bench. Vespiquen has low HP, so I think there's plenty of avenues for Trevenant Break in Expanded. More likely being paired with this Trevenant. Because it's so good to get turn 1 Wally to get the item lock. We've seen how good item lock turn 1 is with the Vileplume Vespiquen that's been doing well in Expanded. So why not try it with Trevenant? And you now have the nice beefy HP Break evolution. And pairing that with Dusknoir, although it is essentially 2 stage 2s, I feel like it could actually really work. I think I have a lot of expectation for this deck. I think it's going to be one that could actually make a name for itself in Expanded, so I'm pretty hopeful. So that is Trevenant. I think pick up. I don't think I'd play more than 2 Break in the even in the Expanded deck, so I wouldn't go crazy for these Break evolutions. I think this is the pre-release promo as well, so maybe get yourself down to a pre-release. You should be able to pull multiple Trevenants anyway, because I think it's just a rare in our English set. I can see it's an uncommon here, so it won't be more than a rare in our set, so I wouldn't go mad getting loads of these. I think the thing you want to pick up is actually these Phantoms, and then start building the Break evolution with Dusknoir. So go out and try that for Expanded. Seems fun. Onto the fighting types. There's a couple that I quite like. Sudowoodo. It's another one of these things that I bring back to Smigglebox because I actually think it's going to be a thing, guys. I'm crossing my fingers. We've not seen like a six corners style deck do well since the last Six Corners deck, which was I think Noble Victories or something like that, where it basically played a bunch of different type attackers. But because we have Smeargle, that sort of option comes back to us. So I feel like Sudowoodo is a great fighting type addition to the Smeargle box player, and it has the attack Let's Imitate for a fighting and colorless. If your opponent used a Pokemon's attack during last turn, you use that attack as this attack. So I think it's most comparable to Zoroark Break. Obviously, it's less versatile than Zoro Break because one of the points of Zoroark Break is that you can use their more expensive attacks that some Pokemon have but just don't use, and also you can just Lysander up and use Foul Play. Whereas this is always in response to something else, so they have to have used Chaos Wheel or they have to have used Evil Ball for you to then imitate it. So it's a lot less versatile for you. Obviously, your opponent will often see it coming if you've benched Sudowoodo because he does have an attack cost of 2 energy. So if you need to like use a surprise attack with Sudowoodo, you need to use something like Energy Switch or Max Elixir or something like that. But if he is just sat on the bench with like something like EXP Share, something that would be played in the Smeargle box deck, I feel like it's quite obvious and like your opponent sometimes can play around it. But oftentimes the main decks in format are really focused on one Pokemon that has one good attack, so it's very difficult for them to play around it, and that's when Sudowoodo can come in as a basic Pokemon and do potentially very expensive attacks just with 2 energy. So I think it has decent stats and stuff like that to the point where it could be played. Definitely in a Smeargle box deck, I'd throw a couple in here just to help your Manectric matchup. So overall, I am hopeful for Sudowoodo. I think it's a fun one and could actually end up being fairly decent. So next up is Garchomp, another card that I'm actually quite hopeful for. It is a fighting type, so we have to look at this as potentially a Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick target. It does, of course, have to compete with Gallade, which is one of the best cards we've seen in a while, so that doesn't bode well for it. It's slightly less splashable than Gallade as well. It has 130 HP and free retreat. These are 2 great things, but both of its attacks need fighting energy. The first attack is for a single fighting, does 60 damage, and you choose 1 energy in your discard pile and attach it to one of your Pokemon. Now, at the moment, the translation is an energy, okay? So that doesn't specify basic or special. And if it doesn't specify basic, it means that we can use specials. So if you can recover strong energy, that is going to be really, really incredible for this deck. I can definitely see Garchomp being its own deck because I think it's pretty strong. It has good weakness against Manectric. Its attacks hit good numbers because its second attack, Biting Pledge, for 2 fighting, does 80, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is an EX, you do 80 more damage. So that's 160. We have Strong Energy, we have Muscle Band, we have Fighting Stadium. Essentially, we can assume that Biting Pledge will be killing EXs for 2 fighting energy, and that's really, really good. We also have Focus Sash, something that we've seen the Gallade Octillery decks been using to great effect because you can tank hits. So the idea is a non-EX Pokemon that can take multiple prizes on EXs is just going to win prize trade a lot of the time. So I think this is really, really strong. Again, free retreat is an extra bonus so that you can have free retreat throughout your whole deck with Garchomps and Horluchas. If you want to play Miltanks, you have the option to do so as well to maybe protect your Garchomps when you're looking to 2-shot stuff. So I am really, really hopeful for this. I think because we have a Karina engine, it's really easy to get rare candy Garchomps and hopefully stream them. As a maxi target, I'm not too hopeful. Like I say, I think competing with Gallade is very difficult. It doesn't offer as much as Gallade does, although it does have energy acceleration, which could be appealing to some decks. Maybe even stuff like Night March, I've heard people discuss that. Because on those turns when you can't find DCE, you can use Assault Turbo for 1 fighting, and then you get to get one from the discard pile and essentially set up another Night Marcher for the following turn. So I guess it keeps you attacking against non-EX decks. However, the 60 damage from Assault Turbo isn't really enough to get knockouts on a lot of things unless they're low HP stuff. And like I keep saying, there's not going to be much of those around just because of Greninja breaks. So I think Night March is going to be the only like low HP based deck that can survive really, because Night March will always survive, and it gets way better with some other cards that I'll get onto in a moment. So I think Garchomp is one non-EX deck that could actually end up working. So far I've made builds and it's been fairly consistent. A quick note on the Gible, it has a fighting energy, attack, selfish draw. You get to discard a card and then draw 2. This is another thing that can help you along the way, especially because you can focus sash Gibbles. You can just focus sash, use that selfish draw, hopefully get into cards that you need, like Karinas, Rare Candies, Garchomps, those sorts of things, more energy. Who knows? And it helps you discard cards as well to help the Assault Turbo attack. So you can get rid of that fighting energy that you need, so that next turn you can get it attached from the bench. So that's pretty awesome. Overall, I'm really happy with this Garchomp. I think it's really, really, really good. Next up is Shiftree. It's a pretty nice trolley card, a very interesting card for sure. 140 HP Dark type is, decent for a stage 2. It has 2 attacks. The first one is Blow Away for a dark and colourless. You get to flip 3 coins. If any are heads, you look at your opponent's hand and then discard a number of cards from your opponent's hand equal to the number of heads. So a couple of good things. You get to look at their hand. This is already really good. So you flip 1 head, you're already seeing their hand. That's awesome. And then you're choosing as well. So other discard cards that we've seen, stuff like Delinquent, that I'll get onto later, your opponent gets to choose. There are other cards like Jim and Cass where it's just random. But here, Blow Away, you get to choose what you're discarding. So you get rid of their supporters, you get rid of their VS Seekers, or you get rid of their energy, whatever you're trying to get rid of. Those are the things you take away. Flipping 3 coins is annoying, but we do have the item, which for some reason I didn't put in this slide, and now I've forgotten the name of, which is going to annoy me. Trick Coin, there you go. You have Trick Coin to try and increase your luck with flips and try and get like 2 cards from their hand each time. So normally it's going to be really nice. Combining this with stuff like Judge or Red Card, you can pretty much leave your opponent in top deck mode. And if you want to get cute, you could even use Love Disc that has another flippy attack, Heart Wink. Flip a coin if heads, your opponent can't draw a card. So if they have no hand and they can't draw, essentially they are locked in stalemate and they can't do anything. And the idea around this is that you have other bench sitters doing things for you. So if you have the bat lines, you're just going to keep using AZ, right? And just keep using the bats whilst you use Heartwink at the end of your turn. While you stack up damage, they literally can't draw into whatever they want. And that should only take you a few turns to win because they can't draw into more basic Pokemon or supporters or energy or anything. So you essentially, if you get this locked down, like it sounds super clunky. Like don't think this is going to be easy to do. Like you need to play Shiftree and Love Discs and some form of bats to get this working. But there's potential for you to completely lock your opponent out of the game by using Blow Away in combination with one of these cards. The following turn, if they top deck badly, then you can keep using Love Disc for the rest of the game, which is really nice. A similar thing is rather than playing Love Disc, you just play Trick Shovel, and you look at their top card. If it's a bad one, you let them top deck into it. If it's a good one, you get rid of it. So you have a lot of control in the format right now if you want to go down this sort of route of discarding cards. Also, the new supporter Delinquent is another card that can discard from your opponent's hand. So if you use Delinquent and then you use Blow Away, you can get rid of a lot of cards from your opponent's hand, and that's going to be really, really big. So I don't really see much of an end game with Shiftree, but it could be really nice to frustrate your opponent out of really doing anything themselves. So his second attack is Tengu Return. For a Dark and DC, you do 60, and choose a trainer card from your discard pile, put it into the hand. So this is really nice actually. It's like half of a Junk Hunt with damage, and getting back more Trick Shovels for a mill strategy could work. Getting back more red cards if they're able to draw out of their bad hand. You can get back into hammers as well, which means you don't have to play 4 copies of stuff like hammers or Trick Shovel. You can play lower counts to up your consistency overall, but then when you do start hitting these troll cards, you can recycle them with Tengu Return. So I think there might even be a deck here. I really am skeptical because it's a stage 2 that requires a lot of energy and stuff, but you have to think that this is some of the best form of hand disruption that we've had for a while, and with so much support with Red Card, Judge, Trick Shovel, Silent Lab even, to an extent, these sorts of things all in one combination can cause a really annoying stally deck that can just shut down a lot of other people's decks. So I think people could have fun with this, and some people might be very frustrated in playtesting when they see those Nuzleafs. So let's move on. Darkrai EX. I think this is the best EX in the set. Definitely for expanded. I think Darkrai is another one of these cards, like Trevenant, I think this and Darkrai, Trevenant and this are the only two cards that I think will break it into Expanded in terms of their own decks. Because Expanded, there's such a high barrier for entry because the decks are so fantastic. So even though there's only 2 new decks potentially coming in, Trevenant's not guaranteed, but I think the Darkrai deck will almost definitely be a deck. It's really difficult to break into Expanded, but I think these two cards, with the extended card pool that we have in Expanded, make this insane. So Darkrai has 2 attacks, 180 HP, weakness to fighting, kind of annoying, but not too worrying because fighting isn't very good at the moment in Expanded, because I think really Gallade is the only thing that you see in terms of attacking in terms of fighting, because Keldeo Stoice often plays multiple Articuno, and that just stomps most fighting decks because a lot of the time it hits for weakness on things like Landorus EX. You would jump to the conclusion that's one of the best fighting type EXs right now. And of course it has resistance as well, and sometimes plays Rough Seas. So we see very few fighting decks other than Gallade, as a maxi target. So the weakness is not terrible. The resistance is kind of meh, it's decent, I guess. But both of his attacks are phenomenal. Dark Pulse does 20 plus 20 more for each Dark Energy attached to all of your Pokemon. By the way, I'm looking at this in Expanded right now. We'll look at it again in terms of Standard. So because we have Dark Patch, you could even play Max Elixir if you really wanted to. I think this attack for just a DCE can be really nice for finishing off opponents. Lower HP stuff definitely in the early game, so I think that's good. His second attack is just phenomenal. This is the main reason why Darkrai is going to be insane. For a Dark DCE, which means we can Dark Patch plus DCE, so we can do this on the first turn. We do 80, and if your opponent's active is asleep, you get to do 80 more damage. So how are we going to send people to sleep? Well, we have Hypnotoxic Laser in Expanded, of course, and we also have Muna. Muna is a stage 1 Psychic type that lets you flip a coin if heads your opponent's active is now asleep, and that's stackable, so you just have 3 Muna, 4 Darkrai, 4 Laser, 3 Verbank, and now suddenly you're one-shotting everything from the first turn. So that sounds very familiar. The reason why Archie Stoice does well is because it can do one-shots from the very first turn, and also again at any other point in the game. So Darkrai has all of those things. I think it is very likely to be a very, very strong deck. We also have the old Darkrai that you can play, so that you have free retreat on stuff. So there's so much support for Darks in Expanded that Darkrai can't be bad, and his attacks are good, so he's going to be good in my opinion. I definitely think if you're going to be playing Expanded tournaments in the next few months, you have to pick up some Darkrai. They're definitely the things I'm going to be chasing after as quickly as possible. So, with that said, is he going to be any good in Standard? Well, I think he'll be decent, but I don't think he's going to be fantastic. The Hypno All-Night Party combo is fairly good. You need to play Muscle Band, you can't play Laser Bank. Muscle Band's the way you can get one-hits. Unfortunately, we can't play the new Stadium plus Fighting Fury Belt because we need to have All-Night Party. But All-Night Party is a fantastic stadium for you. It actually helps you get out of too short range a lot of the time. It becomes almost like a Rough Seas for you. So you have that. You have one-hit potential when Hypno is working. Of course, Ability Lock is a thing. Even Hex Maniac can stop you for a turn of doing good damage. So it's kind of frustrating. The deck is fairly slow because you're playing a stage 1. And of course, we don't have Dark Patch. So Darkrai is actually, his attack, Dark Head, is actually quite slow. I think you need to play Max Elixir, or at least a very high count of Baby Yveltal to keep up. You probably will be playing 1 or 2 Baby Yveltal regardless, just for Night March. So I think it's only an average deck in Standard. I don't think it'll be top tables, but I could see it popping up with a win here or there because there's definitely a good solid base there. It just doesn't have quite the sort of support that it does have in Expanded. There's also a couple of other options. If you don't want to play Hypno, you could play Malamar EX and use maybe Max Elixir plus Energy Switch, right? So that you get the... Oh no, Malamar has to be from the hand, so I guess that doesn't really work. But just attaching to Malamar anyway, and then using Energy Switch onto your Darkrai's can be a way of getting them to sleep. That way you're allowed to use Fighting Fury Belt for more HP. So Darkrai's going to stick around for longer because you still hit 180 if you have the Dark type Stadium in play, which I'll get onto later in a moment as well. So another way we can get around the sleep, if we don't have the Stadium, we could also play Zoroark Floatstone, and in Expanded we have Keldeo Floatstone as well, so, or even just Keldeo Dark Energy plus the old Darkrai. So I'm loving Darkrai in Expanded. In Standard I'm yet to be sold, but I can definitely see there's blatant synergy with a few of these cards from this new set, so definitely pick up Darkrai's. I think he's the best EX in the set by far. Next up is a couple other EXs, Scizor and Mega Scizor. The regular Scizor has 170 HP, so it's on the slightly lower side. It already gets boshed by the fire types, and those are the main ones that look to hit 170 anyway, but because Scizor has weakness, it already is going to have a horrible Charizard Entei matchup. But Steel Wing does 20, and during your opponent's next turn, any damage done is reduced by 20. Not the best numbers, but it's just something to do on the first turn, I guess. Then we have Gale Thrust. For 2 metal, we do 50, and if this becomes your active Pokemon from the bench this turn, you do 60 more damage. So I guess it's okay. 110 does 2-shot a lot of EXs. You can play stuff like Zoroark Floatstone to always get the effect of Gale Thrust off. It's kind of similar to like the regular Manectrix attacks because it's got a 1 energy attack that does low damage. A second energy allows you to do 2-shotting for a random like requirement. I think it's quite easy to move into the active, so oftentimes you will be getting this effect, but its damage isn't spectacular overall. The Mega, it also doesn't really enthuse me too much. I think there's something here, but nothing too amazing. You have to consider that Scizor has to compete with other Megas, and like 220 HP is kind of average. It's a metal type, weak to fire. We know fire is fairly decent, but maybe with the prevalence of Greninja, fire decks will peter out, who knows. Iron Crusher for 2 metal does 120. It's really meh for damage. Like, you're only ever going to be 2-shotting stuff. You never get in good range. But you do get to discard either a special or a stadium in play. So, a special from the active, not just from anywhere. So this could find its way into maybe like a hammer-based deck when you're just trying to rinse them. It can do quite well against Toad if you are able to get into your Mega Evolution. Because you get rid of DCEs. Like similarly, you can get rid of Double Dragons against Giratina, so you actually don't have a horrible matchup. You Hex Maniac, you Iron Crusher, they like have to struggle. Like, do they want to commit to the Chaos Wheel again? Stuff like that could make it quite good for you. So I can see it having some decent matchups because of this attack, but at the same time, it's got a lot of bad matchups, and like I don't see it winning against Fire decks. I don't see it winning against Night March because it's not quick enough, really. In terms of acceleration, it does have a handful of things. You can use Bronzong, of course, and then a range of different attackers. You could play your Aegislash, you could play some Heatran. You have Mega Turbo if you just want to go for basically like 4/4 Scizor and then just a few other techs. And like I say, you might probably will be playing the Zoroark so that you can get value from Gale Thrust almost every turn. So I think there's things that you can play around with Scizor. I personally haven't tested him much, so at the moment he's just not like there's not anything that really stands out that this card is going to be insane. I think it's only ever going to be an average card. I can see people winning with it, but I don't think it's the best Mega we've seen, and I think it can be outclassed by a lot of decks that we already have in the format, so I'm not too enthused by Scizor. Next up is Raticate, another fun evolution line. First off, the Rattata has 30 HP, okay? So it's going to die to anything bat-based. It's going to die to Greninjas, for sure. Straight away, I think this deck really has to be phenomenal to have any chance at being good. So its attack is actually decent. You get to draw and then switch to the bench to slightly protect your Zubats. Not your Zubats, your Rattatas, but obviously you're not safe to these snipers. So it's still a worry. Then the stage 1 Raticate has the ability Antibodies, so it can't be affected by special conditions. This is actually pretty nice. You also get to heal any special conditions if there are any on it, but I don't see how there would be. I guess if they Hex Maniac you, poison you, and then it comes back, you remove the poison. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, you don't get poisoned. That's the main one we're going to be inflicting on ourselves, because there's combinations with Gyarados, which you'll see in a moment. But the colourless attack of the regular Raichu, oh god, I keep mixing up my words, Raticate, is a Dirty Shock for a colourless energy. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned, and discard any tool attached to your opponent's active. This is actually bodes well slightly for when you're up against Garbodor. You can Lysander and use Dirty Shock, and then you're stalling potentially for 10 turns because you get rid of their Float Stone and then they have to dig for more cards, I guess. But yeah, there's going to be ways for the player to get out of there, like put another Float Stone on, for example, but it's still a decent option against Garbodor because this deck is very ability focused. So being able to get rid of tools is actually a nice thing inbuilt that the deck has. Then we have the Break. This is like the main attacker of the deck, so it's basically a stage 2 deck, but you can't use Rare Candy, so I feel like it's going to be very slow. 110 HP on what is essentially a stage 2 is pretty low, but its attack is pretty fantastic. Super Fang does, for DCE, put damage counters on your opponent's active until it has 10 HP remaining. So the idea is you put them down to 10 with the attack, and earlier in the turn you used Ariados to poison your opponent's Pokemon, so then they just die. So literally any deck that's trying to tank, Raticate comes in, puts it down to 10, Ariados kills it. So that's pretty phenomenal. It's ability based and it is slow. Like, it's already slow stage 2. So I think this is more of a gimmick deck than anything else. I just think you're not going to be able to chain Raticates very easily. You need to play a really high ball search count and a really high like recovery Pokemon count and stuff. So you need to have like 2 Super Odds or like 1 Sacred Ash, at minimal 1 Sacred Ash. You have to play lots of level ball because you need to not only find multiple Raticates, you also need to find the Ariados line. You still need to play Ultra Ball because Raticate Break is not searchable with like level ball or anything like that. And each turn you need to be evolving like not only your active Pokemon into a Break, but you need to be evolving your bench into a Raticate. So you can't miss a turn at all with this deck because you're just going to get punished turn after turn because everything has such low HP. In Standard right now, so many decks can just set up new attackers from anywhere. That's even more so the case because Max Elixirs come into the format, so decks can just sort of pop out energy from anywhere and get attacking in response, even if you do wipe out all the energy on the board with your initial Super Fang. So I'm not very hopeful for this deck. I think it's a really fun gimmick. There's a lot of inbuilt things that make it good, but I still think at the moment the Break Evolution mechanic is too slow and it makes this basically an even slower version of a stage 2 deck. And there are things like this Rattata which just get sniped and then you lose prizes and you lose attackers and then you lose the game. Next up is Stantler. I'm not very enthusiastic about this card, but some people have compared it to Miltank, and Miltank has seen play in a bunch of things, so may as well give him a shout out. 90 HP on a basic. Your colourless attack is called Bewilder Horn, and you flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. Yeah, it's not anything too big of a deal, but for the DCE, we do 30 base damage and 50 more if you have a Mega Evolution on your bench. So when are you ever going to want to do this? When are you going to have a Mega Evolution that you don't want to attack with, but you would rather just do 80 damage with Stantler? I feel there's very few situations, but the only ones I could pick out is when you're trying to take advantage of Rough Seas and protect your Mega Pokemon on the bench. So if you're healing up Manectric and you force them to have Lysander, that's something good that you can use by having a Stantler in here, especially because Turbo Bolt, you can attach the 2 energy to it if you have no better targets. Similarly, Primal Kyogre moves energy. You can move it to Stantler. When you receive damage, retreat out of there and try and use Rough Seas to heal off some of this damage, force them to go through a Stantler. So then the following turn, you've got an extra heal. So essentially, you've healed 60 on both these guys if they don't Lysander you up. And hopefully that's enough to keep you attacking for like 1 or 2 more turns. Those are the only very, very niche situations where I can see Stantler making sense. Overall, I think it's way worse than Miltank because the Megas, you will be attacking with them. Whereas Stage 2 Pokemon, there's often Stage 2s that you play just for their ability, and we can use Maxi and Archie to get Stage 2s out, whereas it's difficult to get these Megas out on the first turn. So, yeah. Next up is Ho-Oh, a very interesting EX Pokemon. Some people are over the moon with this card. Some people think this is amazing. I'm going to be a fence sitter. I can see this seeing play, but I don't think it's by any means the best card or the best thing since sliced bread. 180 HP on a colourless EX is kind of frustrating because colourless EX Pokemon are way worse than any other type because they never hit for weakness on things. Like, if this was a fire type Ho-Oh, I would think this card is definitely amazing because then you could use Blacksmith on this guy, and then use Smeargles to get his attack going in one turn. But now we can't. But there still are a lot of things that I like about Ho-Ho. Its ability is called Purifying Fire. Once during a turn, if you have a fire basic energy attached to you, or just a fire energy, it doesn't have to be. Well, I guess because you can't use burning energy, so it does have to be basic fire. Oh, it does say basic fire. Anyway, you may heal 50 from yourself. This is pretty good. We know healing's decent. Healing 50 is, for decks that try and two-shot, that's definitely a big chunk that puts you way out of range. So that's decent. And Elemental Feather is the attack for a Grass, Water, and Lightning. Seriously, Pokemon, why would you do this to us? But we have 130 damage. For 3 energy, it's respectable. It's nothing major. I think for this sort of commitment, I'd much prefer something way better, like putting you into one-shot range at least. You do get to do 30 to one of your opponent's bench, so it's similar to the Palkia's attack that we saw earlier, doing that 30 snipe to the bench as well as easily two-shotting Pokemon, even Megas. You do have the resistance to fighting, which is nice because you want to play this, I think, in Mega Manectric. This is the only way I can see this working, because we have Turbo Bolt, which can attach energy onto Ho-Ho, and they don't all have to be Lightnings, of course, and we can play Smeargle then to use Second Coat to put the right energy on Ho-Ho at the right time. You're also going to be wanting to play Smeargle so that you can actually take advantage of the Purifying Fire ability. So you have 2 Smeargles in play, you switch one to a fire, switch it back to whatever one that you moved, so that you can actually get your attack off. Obviously you could also just manually attach a fire and get the heal that way, but it's still kind of awkward. I don't see its damage being phenomenal, and Mega Manectric does already struggle because it two-shots a lot of the time, so Ho-Ho doesn't help out in that regard, but it does add to the tank potential. Like I was saying with the Standler, there are times when you just want to send something else up, because you can take advantage of Rough Seas on your Mega that's been damaged, and then Ho-Ho additionally having the healing. I feel like this deck does have tank potential. Overall, getting some prize denial is nice, and it could be a way to victory, even though the attack is kind of awkward and you have to fit room for loads of Smeargles and other random energy. I feel like it could be a fun tech to play in your Manectric decks. It's a very, very good card, and it has like a double effect thing similar to Poker Blower and Poker Drawer Plus. So if you play a single Puzzle of Time, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. Big whoop, not very, very good. But if you play 2 of these cards at once, you get to put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. That's any single card that you want. This is insane. In Night March, I think this is going to have one of the biggest effects. We've seen that people are playing Night March Milotic recently, where they play a 2-2 Milotic line. Take those out, play for Puzzle of Time. Now you can get back DCEs via this. And it's not just that you can get back all your other things as well. You can get back your Night Marches, you can get back your techs. I think this is going to be absolutely phenomenal in Night March. Puzzle of Time plus Fighting Fury Belt makes Night March even more threatening than it currently is. I think this is really, really good. Obviously, it makes Night March worse to Train Lock, but like it wasn't good against Train Lock anyway. Like the best way you can win as a Night March player is to just get enough Pokemon in the discard pile turn 1 and win that way. Like playing a Milotic isn't going to help out against like Vespiquen and Vileplume or Trevenant, but Puzzle of Time, if you can just use it in your first turn to look at the top 3, even then it can be useful. Or if you are able to hit 2 along the way in your first turn, then you can find 2 more Battle Compressors, or you can find 2 more of whatever else you've discarded early in your turn. So it can even help in the early turn cycle if you're milling through with Trainer's Mails, Acrobikes, compressing as well. You can draw into these Puzzle of Times, and even in the early turns, it can mean that you're more likely to explode with Night March. And you know you can pull back another compressor, put that into the hand, then compress away 3 more Pokemon. You're way more likely to hit the 180 turn 1. So Puzzle of Time, unlike Milotic, can be used on the first turn to give you like ridiculous value in terms of speed. So in Night March, it's phenomenal. I think in Toad as well, it's going to be a really big card. Milotic was even sneaking into some Toad Tina decks. So if you play Puzzle of Time now, again you can get back DCE, again you can get back Double Dragon. But at the same time, you now have more Crushing Hammers that you can play. It's almost like having a mini trump card, but you get to put hammers straight back into your hand. One of the main reasons trump card was banned was because Toad could respam hammers turn after turn after turn. Well, with Puzzle of Time, you can get back literally 4 Crushing Hammers and use them all over again. If you just want to spend your Puzzle of Times on Crushing Hammers, you can. So essentially, you're playing 8 slots for 8 Crushing Hammers if you use them at the right times. So I think this is insane. Really good for those 2 decks specifically. Puzzle of Time, yeah, it's really, really awesome. Why have I got Gallade there? Let me think of why I have this. Oh, yeah. It's good for Gallade because you can Premonition into your Puzzle of Time pieces a bit better. So if you're even playing like the Yveltal deck, you can play just 2 Puzzle of Time in your deck and like hold on to one of them and Premonition into the other one, stuff like that. It makes it slightly better. Obviously, there's a bit of uproar about this card. People are pretty much thinking that it's going to get banned within a few months. Either this is going to get banned, or Sableye will get banned, or like Puzzle of Time might even get banned and expanded. I think that's the best way they could approach it, by the way. If anyone out there is listening, ban Puzzle of Time exclusively for expanded. I feel like it's time that we have 2 exclusive ban lists. The lists are short at the moment, but as more and more sets come out, there'll be broken combos because of the vast pool of cards that we have, in expanded at least. So it's okay to ban things for expanded that aren't banned in standard. So I feel like Time Puzzle being banned in expanded would be the best way to approach the situation, and that situation is going to be Sableye. You can continually Junk Hunt Life Dew back because you're using Junk Hunt each turn. So when you have Life Dew attached to Sableye, you Junk Hunt. You get back 2 Puzzle of Time. Then your Sableye dies. You use Puzzle of Time to get Life Dew plus another card from your discard pile, like a hammer or whatever else. You attach that Life Dew, use Junk Hunt again, you get 2 Puzzle of Time back. So you can see this is the loop where you will infinitely have Life Dew attached. So your opponent literally has to play something like the Bayonet that shuts off tools, or they need to have enough Xerosic and Megaphone in their deck to wipe off Life Dew about 6 times a game, which, you know, no one wants to do. This is just a vicious deck that cannot be... It's a cycle that really can't be broken unless they're under trainer lock. So it's not really a good idea that lock just outlocks another lock deck. It just doesn't make sense. It's just going to breed more vicious sort of combos. So I'm not sure if this is definitely going to get banned, because of course item lock could just become a bigger thing. Like, we have the Trevenant break that gets better, we have Vespiquen Vileplume already, and we do of course have Toad itself. All of those things can combat Puzzle of Time plus Life Dew combo, but the thing about Sableye Garbodor is it's already like good enough to beat Vespiquen Vileplume and Toad just because it can run them out of energy. It's yet to be seen if it can beat Trevenant. I think it might be one of the best contenders against the Sableye, believe it or not, although it does require just 1 energy in the stadium. That makes it a lot more difficult for the Sableye to out-hammer you by the time you've done a lot of sniping. So I think it's one that Pokemon might have to look at themselves in terms of banning, or errata at least. It might just... You might almost have an errata like we did for Catcher for Time Puzzle, that like it can't pick up Ace Specs or something. I think that's also a great way to go down if you want to do that route. That also makes a lot of sense. So that's my 2 cents about Time Puzzle. I don't think it'll instantly get banned. I think people will have to play more Trainer Lock decks until it is banned, if it is at all. So that's the way I feel about it. But definitely Sableye Garbodor gets stronger with Time Puzzle, because you just get anything back, including Life Dew, which is nuts. Next up we have Max Elixir, a strict upgrade to the card that we got back in Plasma Storm, which was called Ether. It let you look at the top card, and if it's an energy you attach it. Now we get to look at the top 6 cards of our deck and attach it to one of our benched Pokemon, okay? One of our basic benched Pokemon. And shuffle the remaining cards back into our deck. So this is absolutely amazing. More acceleration that can work on any Pokemon. This is awesome. It's kind of what they were trying to do with Smeargle from last set. You're trying to give basically that every type of Pokemon can now have acceleration. And Max Elixir does sort of give us that. Looking at the top 6, depending on how many energy you're playing, is often going to give you good outs. The Charizard Lounge has actually done a set review of the trainers, and they actually have a really interesting chart that you can look at, statistics on how likely you're able to hit Max Elixirs with how many cards you have left in deck and how many energy you're playing and stuff like that. So that could be a good reference if you are going to be playing a Max Elixir deck. and you're thinking about the right number of how many you should be playing to hit, you know, 50% or better throughout most of the game. So there we are. It's a fantastic card. I've definitely tried out already a few decks, and they are vastly improved. It feels like it's one of these cards that's going to improve decks that we've tried to build in the past but haven't quite made it. For example, Machamp. A lot of people were going mad about Machamp when it was first released, thinking that its attacks are insane. It turned out it was just too slow. And now Max Elixir gives Machamp that potentially needed boost to get it attacking a lot easier. Similarly, Glalie EX, its instant freeze attack does really nice numbers, but you never quite get there because you don't have the acceleration that you need to chain that attack each turn. Max Elixir, it can help you get there. Xerneas, we've seen Rainbow Road, it has done well, but it's needed stuff like Bronzong, it's needed other types of energy acceleration. Now you can just use a Max Elixir build, and now you can use Rainbow Force on the first turn and potentially hit 180, which is pretty damn scary, let me tell you that. I think Xerneas is going to be a real big front runner, and one of the reasons why I think Smigglebox will be really good if you have Xerneas at the front of that deck, basically. And even Yveltal EX can do well with this card. If ever you're thinking energy acceleration is going to be good, you have to think about Yveltal EX because it is one of the best attackers we've had in format. We know how good it is with Dark Patch in Expanded, so having Max Elixir isn't quite the same, but we know that we're able to build these decks with the space for what would be for Dark Patch. Now just turn them into Max Elixirs and you're ready to go with your Yveltal deck. So I think there's plenty of things. Even the new Darkrai can really benefit from this. I think Max Elixir is fantastic. If you really want to get the 100% work on Elixir, you could be using Maxi or Archie engines with Gallade or Swampert. Swampert lets you put an energy on top of your deck, basically, and then use Max Elixir to guarantee it. And then Premonition, although it doesn't allow you to change your top decks, it allows you to look at the top 5. So it lets you know, like, okay, I shouldn't be using Elixir here because 5 of the 6 that I'm going to look at are definitely not energy. And is it worth me risking one extra card being one or not? So you can use Premonition, see that there's either one there and you use it, or that there isn't one in the top 5, then you don't use it, or you use something like a Trainer's Mail and then use the Elixir afterwards because you've reset your top decks. So plenty of avenues to try and maximize your potential with Max Elixir. But I feel like even in decks where you just play 4 Max Elixir and sort of take the gamble on the top 6, if you play enough basic energy, I feel like it's often worth the benefit. So I think it's really, really fantastic. And again, shout out to Smigglebox. It's going to be a deck that I profile soon because Max Elixir makes it happen. And I really appreciate that. It's awesome. Next up is Max Potion. It returns to the format. That's the obviously old artwork, so I didn't feel like doing the weird text box or whatever. I'll let you just read it from here. Heal all damage from one of your Pokemon. Discard all the energy attached. So obviously this could breathe life back into Aromatisse. Aromatisse hasn't been doing too well since Max Potion's exit. I think healing is definitely an option in Standard right now. We've seen that with Sceptile. We've seen that with Mega Mewtwo even. So if you have the right combination of Pokemon, tanking with Max Potion is a very real possibility. Also Mega Manectric. When Mega Manectric was at the peak of its powers and really dominating, that was when you had the ability to play even just like 1 or 2 Max Potion in your deck. That's when I was succeeding with Manectric as well, just because I love the combo of you heal, you retreat out of one Mega into your other, and you reattach those energies with Turbo Bolt. It's one of these things that just helps you really tank and deny prizes. It's a really nice card for those 2 decks. So I think that's a real energy. It's not like an energy boost, it's like a big injection to the deck that helps it be strong. Also a quick note is that Whale Lord, 250 HP is a lot to get through. It gets its little toy Max Potion back, so there's potential for that deck to get slightly stronger. So, oh dear, Whale Lord's back. Be warned. Next up we have an interesting item called Burst Balloon. I don't really know where to place this card. Some people are saying it's the best thing since sliced bread. Some people think it's absolute garbage. Why would you play this? I can definitely see niche purposes for this card. I'm yet to see how well it's done in testing and how well your opponent can play around it. So here it is. If this card is attached to a Pokemon, at the end of your opponent's turn, discard it, okay? So you get this item for 1 turn, basically. This tool stays for 1 turn, then goes. When the Pokemon this card is attached to is damaged by an opponent's Pokemon's attack, put 6 counters on the attacking Pokemon. So it's like a Rock Guard that discards itself at the end of your opponent's turn. So Why is this going to be good? Why is this not very good? Okay, so you attach this to, say, a Scizor EX against... The ideal is to be up against Night March. A lot of people are saying this is a Night March counter. So you use Quaking Punch, you've killed the Joltik, but you've got Burst Balloon on. So now they come in with Pumpkaboo. If they want to respond KO your Seismitoad, they also have to lose their Pumpkaboo. That's the whole idea of Burst Balloon. But then you think, well, I can just Lysander around and take prizes elsewhere. Yes, you definitely can do that. But then the Toad still has DCE, it's still ready to keep going with Quaking Punch. Or any other attacker, really. Like, if you're trying to protect an attacker, like something that doesn't need Muscle Band, you just put Burst Balloon on, and either they have to Lysander around, or like, you know, Zerosic I guess works, or they have to tank this 6 damage, which is definitely influential damage counters, let's say. It's definitely enough to the point where it's an irritation. Definitely against like Night March it's huge, because they completely lose prize trade if you're playing like 3 Burst Balloons, or you don't even need 4 Burst Balloons to win the prize trade from there on. So that's fantastic. It's going to really help out at swinging damage. I think Seismitoad EX might even be playing 4 Burst Balloon and Eco Arms over Muscle Band, because it's a way of getting more damage counters on. Of course, you can argue that your opponent can just not attack for a turn, but again, you don't mind that at all. You almost play the cards to bait them not attacking, because then you've not received damage. They've basically lost a turn of tempo, and you don't mind spending a tool card to do that. Like, if there was a tool in the game that said your opponent can't attack next turn, you'd definitely play that. So Burst Balloon can sometimes be enough of a deterrent to stop your opponent doing that. And if they do keep doing it, definitely for Toad, Quaking Punch plus the 6 damage from Burst Balloon, that's 90 damage a turn. So that's absolutely nuts. So Burst Balloon, Eco Arm could be a combination that we see with Seismitoad to try and counter Night March. It could just be thrown into decks as a Night March counter in general, depending on how good Night March gets, because Time Puzzle is going to be nuts with Night March, let me tell you that for free. And also Fighting Fury Belt is really good for Night March, so I feel like it needs a check, and Burst Balloon probably is that check that we have. There's also the fun play of putting up Robo-Subs, putting Burst Balloons on them, but at that point people will just pass the turn, because they don't take prizes on Robo-Sub anyway, so I think it's more of a gimmick than actually good. But I think this Burst Balloon plus Eco Arm, like 2 Eco Arm in a Toad deck, I think that's the best way that I've found for playing it right now. There's, of course, you could put it on the Entei that has the trait that allows you to put 2 tools on, but again, at that point, tanking 120 damage just for damaging an Entei, it's not going to be worth it. They'll pass the turn, but sometimes that's what you want them to do, so who knows, it could work in the Entei deck as well. Again, it's the case of trial and error. At the moment, I'm most happy with the Burst Balloon with something like Seismitoad EX, because the numbers start seeming really nice. Next up is Fighting Fury Belt. I've mentioned this card a couple of times already. I'm sure you guys are familiar with what it does. Basic Pokemon this card is attached to gets plus 40 HP, and you get to do 10 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. 10 more damage, sorry, for all of your attacks. So this is insane. It's half of a Muscle Band, but you also get 40 plus HP. There is, of course, Assault Vest in format, which does minus 40 for things that have special energy. That card has seen quite a bit of play, and Fighting Fury Belt effectively gives you that. Like, it's worse than Assault Vest in terms that, like, reducing damage is better than having 40 plus HP. But this is universal plus 40 HP, whereas Assault Vest only works if they have specials. So for tank potential, this could be really good for things like Wailord, for things like Houndoom, to help you mill and stay out of range. For Entei, I think you still want to play Assault Vest, because the plus 20 for 2 Fighting Fury Belts isn't worth it a lot of the time. Even if you are gaining 80 HP, it's way better to reduce 80 damage from Assault Vest. So I don't think it works in the Entei deck. I think the main swing cards where this card is going to be a staple, it's going to be Yveltal decks, for one, because you have plus 10 damage, which is kind of okay. A lot of the time, you're still getting 2 shots on Y Cyclone, and of course you can use the Dark type Stadium that I'll get onto momentarily that also gives you plus 10 damage. So effectively now you still have Muscle Band, but you also have plus 40 HP. And dealing with a 210 HP Yveltal is going to be a real pain. So that sounds awesome. And the other one, of course, I've talked about it a lot already, is Night March. A Pumpkaboo with 100 HP is fantastic. And a Joltik with 70 HP is also fantastic. With Puzzle of Time, you don't even need to play 4 Fighting Fury Belts. You can probably get away with just 2. And then on those turns when you feel it's difficult for your opponent to respond KO, you slap that Fury Belt on to try and secure it. That's absolutely fantastic. Like, the 2 weaknesses of Night March right now is bats, because bats kill little HP Joltics and Pumpkaboos. Well, Fury Belt gives you plus 40 HP, so the bats are way less of an issue. And also, it's going to be Baby Yveltal. And Baby Yveltal no longer one-hits Joltik with a Fury Belt on. So then you're in the clear, really. You don't have that bad matchup as bad anymore. So Night March gets way better. I think the biggest threat for Night March going, like, from then on, is going to be Burst Balloon and, of course, Greninja coming out. Those things are going to try and keep Night March in check, because it seems to have again somehow received a lot from this set, and it's getting a lot stronger than, like, proportionally to the other decks in format that we have currently. So it feels like it's getting the most power creep from this set. So it's good that there's a couple of things that also keep it in check. Next up is the Spirit Links. I didn't change the text on them because we all know what they do, but it's good to know that our Megas are still getting Spirit Links. Next up is Delinquent, a supporter card that is very, very interesting. I think this is, again, one of the most powerful cards we're getting from this set. And it's one of these cards that's actually, like, changing playstyles rather than changing matchups specifically. I think Delinquent is going to be one of these supporters like Hexmaniac that features on a one-of in a lot of decks, especially Battle Compressor VS Seeker decks, because oftentimes they play a bunch of different one-of supporters and just dump them so that they can use them with VS Seeker later on down the line. I think this is exactly how Delinquent will be played. It discards a Stadium in play, and if you do, your opponent chooses 3 cards from their hand and discards them. So now your opponent, if you're playing if you know your opponent's playing Delinquent, you need to play as if you have you can't go lower than a 4-card hand at any point, because they could just use Delinquent and destroy you. And think about how many times you want to lower your hand size down to 1, and then you're just holding on to VS Seeker or Sycamore or something like that. Now Delinquent can completely punish those plays, and it's going to completely stop people extending to that point. Or if they are going to extend that far, they have to be aware of the consequences that they could end up being in top deck mode from then on. So it really does add a new dynamic to the game that I think is very, very interesting. And players of the highest level, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how we try and play around this. I think there's going to be times when you can bluff Delinquent, when you can, threaten Delinquent. There's going to be times when you can bait a Delinquent even if you have a 3-card hand, but they're all terrible. Or, like, if you're holding no hand, some people might even just go down to 0 hand so that they can't get hit with Delinquent. Like, they accept the fact that they could get Delinquented, so they go down to 0 just for the sake of it. It could also lead to an increased amount of play for things like Gallade, so that instead of having a good hand, you have a good top deck, so you're not as weak to Delinquent. It could lead to Octillery becoming good, so that you can keep refreshing the hand, and Delinquent actually doesn't become as much of a pain. I really think this is a format shifting card. I think it's as good as something like Hexmaniac, and if you look at Hexmaniac, it almost features as a one-of in every deck, because this gives you a win condition. If you can empty your opponent's hand, basically, like, you're not going to play Delinquent if they have a 6-card hand. You'll play it if they have a 3 or 4-card hand most of the time, for that sort of disruption. I guess because we don't have N, and this is much stronger than Judge. If you're on one of those turns when, you lose if they have the combination of cards, like, okay, they need Lysander DCE to win here. I'll try and Delinquent if they have a 4-card hand or something like that, to make them reach for it. So I think Delinquent is absolutely fantastic. I also think it's going to be one of these cards that you might see in multiples of in these sorts of stally decks. I mentioned Shiftree. I also think Toad Red Card is a deck that a few players have played. It's one of these decks that just plays 4 Red Card, 4 Silent Lab, maximum sort of troll potential, and now having 1 or 2 Delinquents in that deck could make it even more horrible. Getting red carded, then using Delinquent, they have 1 card that they are clutching onto as tightly as they can, because then they're getting hit with Quaking Punch, and you're going to put Silent Lab in most of the time as well. So it's going to be very difficult for them. There are a few things, like, you need to have stadiums of your own, probably, if you want to play this. it could even lead to us not playing counter stadiums. Like, there's a few decks right now that you play stadiums just to be like, oh, I don't want Night March to have Dimension Valley all game, so I'll just play a couple of stadiums to force them to dig for more cards. Delinquent can now be that extra slot, so I think there's a few decks that don't really necessarily need a stadium, where you can just use it as almost like having a counter stadium. So I really love this card. You definitely have to worry about it. It's going to be a real factor in the game from here on out, because people playing it will sometimes get wins just by, well, like a good time Delinquent gives your opponent nothing, and then they're in top deck mode, and if they don't top deck well, you're just going to win because they have nothing to play. Next up is Misty's Determination. I'm determined that this card is not going to be very good. You discard a card from your hand, that's already pretty bad, and if you do, look at the top 8 cards and put one of them into your hand and shuffle the others back into your deck. So you're not even guaranteeing to hit exactly what you want. 8 cards that you get to look at is slightly higher than Sycamore, so I guess if you're digging with Sycamore, you could be digging with a Misty for 1 card, but how many times are you Sycamoring looking for more than 1 card? Quite often, I would imagine, and you also have to discard a card. The only very niche reason why I think Misty might see play is in the Gallade Octillery deck. Gallade Octillery doesn't play any Sycamores because it's too painful, but there are times when you need to lower your hand size, and Misty's Determination could be the option here. Especially because we have Premonition, we can already look at the top 5, and if we know that there's a card that we want from there, we can use Misty's to discard a card, and then we get to pick that one up, and that also resets our top decks, so then we can use Abyss Hand to draw into more cards again. So Misty's Determination is essentially a -1, so that can help out the Octillery Gallade deck in particular, because you want to keep a low hand size so that Abyss Hand keeps getting value each turn. So I think it may fit in as a 1-of or 2-of in there. But in everything else, I really think this is not a very good card. Next is Psychic's Mind Reading. This is an interesting supporter again. I'm not too convinced of how playable this is going to be. You can see I've put Gallade Octillery back in the picture because it's going to be one of these cards. Your opponent reveals their hand. First of all, this is huge. Seeing what your opponent has is a real factor of the card game that we don't see very often. But if you play against people open-handedly, you play so differently to how you would when they have a closed hand. Like, at the moment, we can only ask our opponent how many are in the hand, and then make our assessments of what it's like in there, and then we can be completely off on our reading, we can get bluffed or whatever. But knowing your opponent's hand is really good. You know exactly what you need to play around, you pretty much know what they're going to do the following turn, and that's fantastic. So if you do that at the start of the turn, forcing your opponent to reveal their hand already can change the complexion of your turn overall, which is pretty cool. And then you discard as many cards from your hand as you like, and then draw that many cards. So it's kind of dump and draw, but it's a really weak dump and draw. Oftentimes you're holding on to a couple of cards that you need to keep, and then Psychic's Mind Reading is going to get rid of like 3, and then you draw into 3 more, I guess. I don't see it being a powerful draw supporter, unless you're playing like a really Pokemon heavy version of Vespiquen or Night March, I guess. But it could be one of these cards that gets compressed away, and every now and then you need to know what your opponent's playing. Like, if you know that they have a hand, or if, well, you don't know, but you want to see what they've got, and maybe you're debating a certain play that could be questionable. If they have certain outs, you could be punished. You can see if they have it, and then you can go all in. Like, if you're going for, I guess an example would be, like back in the day when there was Mewtwo Wars, right? You'd have to know when and when not to go Mewtwo. Using this would be like, oh, okay, he doesn't have Mewtwo DC in hand, so I may as well just go all in with my Mewtwo now. Although there aren't that many situations in the format right now, there'll be times when you need to go all in with your deck. Be it an extra energy commitment, or just be it bringing up an EX when your opponent only has 2 prizes left, stuff like that. And just knowing your opponent's hand size can give you the best informed decision as to what you're going to do in that turn. Is that going to be enough reason to play it as your supporter for the turn? Probably not. So oftentimes I think this won't see play. But again, it could feature in the Gallade Octillery deck so that you can dump excess cards and get more with Abyss Hand, because it's again, it's a -1 once you've used a supporter. So that's pretty awesome. I think it might feature again as a 1-of in that deck, because now you can see your own hand, you can see your opponent's hand, and you can see your own top decks. So you have so much control of that game, it's very difficult for you to lose if you do play Psychic's Mind Reading. So I think Gallade Octillery is a deck that actually improves with this new set because of the supporters that are very, very niche, but pretty good in that deck. So here is the stadium, Reverse Valley. I've spoken about it a couple of times. It's one of these stadiums that has twofold effects, like Parallel City. So with this side facing you, players' metal Pokemon, any damage done by the opponents is reduced by 10, so it's going to help your tanking potential. I've put some additional tanking cards that you could imagine stacking up onto a metal Pokemon. We of course do have shield energy, so these all count as 10, so with the stadium, 4 of these energy and either Hard Charm or Vest, we will be getting rid of a lot of, or reducing a lot of damage. I don't think there's many good tanky metal types at the moment, unfortunately. I guess Mega Scizor might be an option, but overall I don't see Reverse Valley seeing that much play. I think if you want to play a counter stadium perhaps, because it is slightly stronger than Steel Shelter at the moment, because special conditions aren't very popular at the moment in standard at least, so it might get the nod over Steel Shelter even though it's not too helpful overall, just because Steel Shelter is often used as just a counter stadium. I think the other side is the one where we're going to see it more often, and Dark Pokemon do 10 more damage to your opponent's active when it faces this side, so it's way better than Shadow Circle in my opinion for Dark decks, unless you're super paranoid about Manectric, but oftentimes people are just playing Gallade now to get around a Manectric instead. So Shadow Circle really isn't being played. At the moment I think Dark decks are playing Parallel City just because there's nothing better to use as a counter stadium, but now we have Reverse Valley, and we do plus 10. And is plus 10 very good? Well, I guess if we add a Fury Belt to that plus 10, we do the same damage that we would be with a Muscle Band. So we don't need to play Muscle Band in our Dark decks anymore if we want to play Reverse Valley and Fury Belt. So it essentially gives our deck, our EX attackers, and even Baby Veltal now has 170 HP. That's pretty insane in my opinion. Having to force 170 damage just for a single prize sounds great. And that's just like a regular attacker while you set up as well, so it's not like you're just trying to tank with it, it's just a real possibility that you could be using that. And the Reverse Valley, it's rarely going to punish you. Like, when are you ever going to be playing against metal decks? There are hardly any, so it's not a worry. Like, they just cancel out if you are up against a metal deck, so it's quite fun. Like, if a Dark deck is playing a metal deck at least. But that's rarely going to affect you to the point where you miss knockouts, so I think you're pretty safe playing the Reverse Valley and then Fury Belt, because it's going to really help your numbers. Obviously the Darkrai has to play All Night Party, so that doesn't have the option of using Fury Belt, unless you want to risk not killing 180 HP EXs. You might be able to play a split of Muscle Band and Fury Belt, but that's really up to you. Overall, I think this opens up the door to play Fury Belt in Dark decks, which is pretty awesome. So Dark decks are also getting a big injection with this stadium. You wouldn't really think it helps too much, but it opens the door for Fury Belt, so that we're not missing out on damage that we could be getting with Muscle Band. So pretty cool. I think this is a fairly decent stadium for Dark decks. It might be a 1 or 2 of, I'd say. Next up is All Night Party. I just mentioned it. Spoke about it when talking with Hypno. That's the main application I see for this card. So once during each player's turn, if that player's active is asleep, he or she may remove that special condition and heal 30. So the whole point of the Darkrai deck is that you're going to get 1 hits once you send them to sleep. So your opponent is never going to get the good effect of All Night Party unless you've somehow missed the KO. So really it's just a heal 30 to your own Darkrai. So you use Goodnight Babies, you heal your Darkrai for 30, then you kill them because they're still asleep. That's the whole combo. It works really nicely in the Darkrai deck. I don't see it seeing much application elsewhere, but it's really good for Darkrai, so there we go. And finally we have Splash Energy. I think this is the last card. This is the new special energy for water types, and it's pretty much a reprint of Rescue Energy, but just for water Pokemon. And basically, the water Pokemon this is attached to, when it gets knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, be aware that there's ways around it, like if you get poisoned or if you get done with bat drops, you don't get this effect. But you put that Pokemon into your hand and discard all cards attached to it. So if it is an evolution line, you get to take the whole evolution line, even though it does say discard all cards attached. What that's referring to is you can't pick up the Splash Energy again, so you're just getting the physical Pokemon back with Splash Energy. But that could be pretty strong. I don't think there's going to be too many water decks that actually can benefit from this. There's a handful. I think if you're playing Huntail Ho-Ho, you might want to play some Splash Energy. Even just for stuff like Keldeo Blastoise, you may just play 1 or 2 Splash so that you can have more tech attackers. Like, you can now go down to 1 Articuno because you can rely on Splash Energy to get that Articuno back in those matchups. Maybe it allows Keldeo Blastoise to be a bit more techy. Greninja Break, it could use it, but oftentimes it needs more basic energy in the deck because it works with the Water Shurikens, and even the new Greninja picks up Water Energy, so I don't think it's going to work too nicely in Greninja. Again, it could work in Mega decks. Gyarados and Kyogre, I guess, could feature 1 or 2. I don't think it's ever going to feature as more than 1 or 2 of, especially because there's so much Hammer hate right now. I don't actually see Splash Energy working too well because there's so many downsides to playing specials. I think oftentimes you're better off just playing a Super Rod than Splash Energy at the moment because there's nothing too big that benefits from it, in my opinion. But you might want to play 1 or 2 of in your water decks just to get a bit of recovery. Remember as well, for the Greninja thing in particular, if you're using the Frogadier to water clone stuff, you don't pick up Froakies because you haven't put them down. You've used Frogadiers to get them out, so there's plenty of reasons why not to play it in Greninja, even though it's essentially a stage 3, so you pick up the most amount of Pokemon. It actually isn't that effective in that deck. So there we go, that is the special energy. And oh yeah, there's reprints as well. I'm not really going to talk about the reprints because we know what they all do. You can all search them because I'm lazy. But yeah, those are the reprints we're getting, including the lovely looking Skylar. So yeah, that's the set, guys. So there's some great stuff. Let me know what your favourite Pokemon is, what your favourite item is, and your favourite new deck from the set. I'd like to hear all 3 of those things. If you only have the answer to one of those things, just shove it down there as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and listening to me rabble on about this set. Let me know if there's something I missed, maybe a card that I missed, maybe a combo with a new card that I did discuss, but I didn't actually talk about the combo that you think really works. Maybe there's something awesome with Max Elixir that I failed to mention. Maybe I misquoted a card because I wasn't reading and I was just going on a tangent, something like that. So tell me everything down below. I hope you guys enjoyed, and well done for staying to the end, because this is probably a really long video because my voice is really hurting. But there we are, guys. It's been Joe from Omnipoke, and I'll see you guys next time.